Transformers. I don't know how many of my few viewers know this, but if you're a friend or family member of mine, you know I used to be a huge fan of Transformers, and to this day, I still have love and appreciation for the series. And growing up, there were two Transformers series I would obsess over: Transformers Animated and the Michael Bay movies. Now, as fun as it is to make fun of Michael Bay's style of filmmaking, I actually have a lot of appreciation for the way he directs his movies. While his films aren't exactly masterpieces, they're always a lot of fun, and I don't think he should get hate for that. And he honestly sounds like an alright guy, and he doesn't seem stuck up like a director like M. Night Shyamalan. And that brings us to his Transformers series. Arguably the most popular series he's ever created, since they were each massive hits at the box office. Despite this though, a lot of people look back at the series as a silly, forgettable train wreck. While my opinion won't be 100% trustworthy since I am largely blinded by nostalgia, I am obviously still a fan of these movies years later. And after rewatching the original Transformers for the first time in years, I am here to talk about what I think of the first movie. Without any more stalling, let's begin. Now, the plot to this movie is pretty simple. After the Cybertron war between the Autobots and the Decepticons, a cube that wields great power was lost somewhere in the galaxy. Would you know it? It just happens to have landed in Earth. We then follow a nerdy teenage boy named Sam Witwicky, who's finally getting a new car, but this new car turns out to be an Autobot named Bumblebee. After the situation progresses a bit, Sam finds himself in the middle of a war between the Cybertronian species, as each side attempts to find a pair of glasses that belong to Sam's grandfather. If found, it will lead them to the cube. If the Autobots find it, it will be rightfully destroyed or hidden. If the Decepticons find it, humanity will be wiped out. There's obviously a lot more to the plot that I left out, but if I tried to explain all of it, this wouldn't exactly be a fast thoughts video. So yeah, that's the plot, and honestly, it's not a bad one. Not only does it do a decent job establishing the Autobots and Decepticons war, but it perfectly explains why they're fighting and what led them to Earth and what any of this has to do with a horny teenage boy. Now, the only thing I don't like about these movies is how much attention they give the human characters and how little they give the Transformers themselves. Don't get me wrong, the human characters in this movie are nice, different from one another, and pretty funny at times, but for a movie that has a huge selection of fan-favorite Autobots and Decepticons, we really don't see much of their personality shine through. The most personality we get from any of them is Bumblebee, since we see him the most and he's pretty funny. But that's it, and all the Autobots are just walking stereotypes. Optimus is the wise leader, Ratchet is the rational thinker and healer, Ironhide's whole personality is he wants to shoot things, and Jazz is the cool one. But don't even get me started on the Decepticons. There are about 6 or 7 Decepticons seen in this movie, and all but 2 of them don't have any personality. The 2 that do get blessed with being considered actual characters are Starscream and Megatron, the 2 most popular. But my personal favorite Decepticon, Starscream, is degraded from being a stuck-up, egotistical coward hell-bent on replacing Megatron as leader of the Decepticons, to a one-dimensional henchman with 1 or 2 lines and 1 cool action scene. And Megatron isn't much better either. Now, Megatron is usually depicted to be a one-dimensional tyrannical leader, but in most incarnations, he is terrifying. But in this one, he's not calculating nor fearful. He's pretty boring and only serves to be just a generic all-powerful antagonist. So yeah, while I wish the Cybertronian characters got more attention, if you're not already a Transformers fan going in, you'll likely not care as much. Now, one thing you absolutely cannot say is a con about this movie is its action and effects. It's no secret this movie had a big budget, but Michael Bay doesn't waste a single dollar of it. The fight scenes, look at the Transformers, the destruction, it's not every day a movie from 2008 can pass off as a movie from 2020, but this movie certainly holds up 12 years later. I mean, just look at a scene of Optimus Prime transforming. That is still cool to see. So yeah, if you want to see a cool movie about robots fighting each other, you'll likely not be disappointed with this one. However, can I just talk about this movie's tone? One special thing about Michael Bay movies is the fact that all of them feel like Michael Bay movies. That can either be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your preference, but I personally love the tone these movies have. Everything from the wacky humor and the comedically over-the-top characters, I just love watching his movies. They never bore me, and no matter if you like or hate his direction, you can't lie and say that you get bored watching his movies. One thing that helps cement this opinion of mine is the pacing. These movies move at a pretty solid pace, and like I said, they'll never bore you. In conclusion, is Transformers a good movie? I'd honestly say yes. If you take away all the context when it comes to the director or the series it's attached to, and you judge Transformers on its own, then I think this movie constitutes as good. However, I can see why you would be turned off by it. It has Michael Bay's fingerprints all over it. There's a lot of missed opportunities, underutilized characters from a pretty cool franchise. It was a tough choice between a 3 or a 4, but I think my nostalgia has gotten the better of me, and I'm giving it a 4 on my end. It's a lot of fun, and it never gets tiring to revisit. So yeah, Transformers gets a 4 out of 5. Transformers Revenge of the Fallen. When I was a little Sly fan, I only had one Transformers movie on DVD. That movie was Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, and I wasn't a big fan of it. I thought it moved way too slowly and committed the worst sin any Michael Bay movie could ever commit. The sin of being boring. And for many years, I considered it the worst Transformers movie ever made. But when I decided to rewatch it again for the sake of this review, I had a feeling that watching it through the lenses of a more educated 17-year-old who actually pays attention to movies would open my eyes a bit more. The result? I came out really liking it. But there are still issues. So what works about Transformers Revenge of the Fallen? What doesn't? Without any more stalling, let's talk about it. A while after the events of the first movie, the United States military has formed an alliance with the Autobots, and both forces focus their efforts on hunting down Decepticons. But when the revival of an ancient enemy threatens the world, Sam and the Cybertronian heroes have to stop the Decepticons before it's too late. The first movie had a very cheesy and simplistic plot, but this one is way more convoluted. It's nothing like Inception level, but it does expand the lore a great bit. Basically, the original Primes harvested suns for energy, and their one rule was to not harvest suns next to populated planets. One of these Primes wanted to break that tradition when it came to Earth, and he turned on his brethren, but he was defeated and presumed dead. However, he's been waiting all these years for the last Prime to finally die out so he can activate a machine that will destroy the Earth. Now, it's never explained why this guy hates the Earth so much. He just does. And I'm just gonna say it, this guy is not a great antagonist. Similar to Megatron from the last movie, he lacks any sort of complexity or intimidation. However, he's even worse because he goes out really easily, he's an unrecognizable character, and his motivation is dumb. Like, why would he go through so much trouble to wipe out a race that at the time were extremely primitive? It's like a man risking getting the death penalty because he wants to wipe out an ant colony because he hates ants. We also follow Sam, who's now going to college, and the beginning of the movie is pretty entertaining, and after the forest battle, which is easily the best scene in the movie, Optimus Prime is killed. Sam and the other human characters, along with Bumblebee, and these two mistakes are forced to stop the Decepticons themselves. And this part of the movie is when the pacing comes to a screeching halt. Other than that, the story to this movie is a really interesting one, and it does what a good sequel is supposed to do. It continues the journey of our characters while simultaneously building upon the lore its predecessor established. Now, as for the characters themselves, nothing much has changed. All of the Autobots are all one-dimensional stereotypes, and the new ones aren't noteworthy. However, I can say that Megatron and Starscream are improved. Since we have more screen time with Megatron, he's much more of an established threat and way more entertaining, and Starscream is that good old treacherous weasel we all know and love. Just like the first movie, the human characters are all distinct and different from one another while also being entertaining. However, one weird thing is that these characters are way more cartoony and over the top than they were the last movie. I'm talking really cartoony. Most of this has to do with the humor of the movie. While the first one had truckloads of over-the-top Michael Bay comedy, this movie goes all in. That's definitely not a bad thing because the humor was pretty funny and I was entertained, and most funny moments got me to laugh. However, if you want a Transformer movie that takes itself seriously, you might want to skip this one. Another thing returning from its predecessor is the action and effects. 2 words: jaw-dropping. If the effects from the last movie still hold up, you bet your energon this one still looks great in that department. In conclusion, Transformers Revenge of the Fallen is a good movie. The plot, while a little too ridiculous, is not too unbelievable. The human characters are all a lot of fun. The Transformers themselves are still one-dimensional but entertaining. The comedy is over the top but still funny, and the action is still amazing. Sorry for the short review, but I can't help it. Not too much to say that I haven't said in my first review. While the first one is more rewatchable, this one is still good. I'm giving it a 4 out of 5. Can I tell you guys about the best day of my life? I was 8 years old and me and my dad went to a mall in Atlanta. We stopped at a food course, got some Chinese food, I tried sushi for the first time, I hated it, and then we went and saw Transformers Dark of the Moon in a theater that was attached to the mall. This was back in 2011 when malls used to do this. Now, a bit of context, I was unbelievably hyped for Transformers 3. I would watch the trailers that would come on TV every time they were on, and prior to us going to the mall, I even got a Transformers 3 Happy Meal. And then we both sat down for 2 hours and 37 minutes, and it quickly became one of my favorite movies of all time. Me and my dad then regrouped with my mom and sisters, and we left the mall while having more Asian food because I love Asian food, and I think I recall getting a few PS2 games as well that day. I just wanted to share this amazing memory with you guys, since if I could relive any day of my life, this would be that day. And the fact that this memory is going to become a decade old later this year is insane. So, if you came here expecting a fair criticism of this movie, while I will point out flaws I noticed in my latest rewatch, I couldn't give this movie a bad rating if I wanted to. I'll still provide reasoning to my points like always, and this will be a normal review, but just know this is a review that's clouded by nothing but nostalgia. So, with that being said, let's talk about the conclusion to the original Michael Bay Transformers trilogy, Dark of the Moon. After the Autobots figure out a ship containing Optimus' mentor and predecessor, Sentinel Prime, has been on Earth's moon this entire time, they go to retrieve him and with the Matrix. Meanwhile, the Decepticons have been plotting a mysterious but undoubtedly sinister scheme, and we also follow Sam, now fresh out of college, trying to find a job. Now, the plot to this movie is definitely not a bad one. Seeing Sam go from a high school student to a college student to someone trying to find a job is a nice natural progression. And I like the addition of making Sentinel Prime Optimus' role model. It makes what happens later in the movie much more of an emotional blow, maybe not to the audience, but understandably to Optimus. Later in the movie, Sentinel Prime reveals he struck a deal with Megatron for the survival of Cybertron. Making Sentinel into a bad guy was a really cool move that took 8-year-old me completely by surprise. However, once the Decepticons begin their invasion in Chicago, I'm not even kidding, the movie just turns into a giant action blockbuster of nothing but destruction, action, and both major and minor Autobots and Decepticons dying, which is a perfect direction to go for in what was supposed to be the final installment in the series. Seriously, I was blown away when I watched this in theaters. This movie has some of the most insane action scenes I've ever seen. I mean, the budget was $98 million, so that's not all that surprising. But seriously, this movie turns into nothing but an action-packed marathon after the first 30 or 40 minutes. And like I said before, this movie has a high character death count. Ironhide, Soundwave, these two goofuses, Starscream, Megatron, Sentinel Prime, and this dude all perish in the movie. Going in, I wasn't expecting many deaths to take place, so huge casualties genuinely took me by surprise. Yeah, this movie is chaotic and a lot of fun, and its high-stakes action is perfect for a third movie in the trilogy. Now, as far as the characters are treated in this movie, same old, same old. You should know by now that the Cybertronian characters are mostly background and the human characters are the main focus. Now, even though my review of the first movie is only about 2 weeks old, I wish I could take back my complaint of a lack of focus on the Transformers. While I wish they got more screen time in the first movie, it wasn't until the third movie where I realized I honestly don't mind this direction. While most people were annoyed with the human characters in this trilogy, I honestly found them pretty enjoyable. And we actually get a nice character arc out of Sam in this movie. He starts out unsatisfied with his mundane life after all the epic stuff that happened in the first two movies, but by the end, he realizes all he wants is his girlfriend. Oh, I should probably mention that. Yeah, Michaela from the last two movies makes no appearances in this one because behind the scenes, Megan Fox came out and compared Michael Bay to Hitler when it came to directing. That wasn't exactly a way to get a promotion, so Bay immediately fired her and got a new actress to play Sam's new girlfriend. While this is understandable, the way they talk about the character of Michaela in this movie is kinda dumb. Apparently Michaela dumped Sam, and Sam had a lot of problems with her because she was mean. Not only is this uncharacteristic of the two since the first two movies showed how much they cared about each other, but it's clear the stuff they say about her is Michael Bay letting his feelings out. But yeah, the characters in this movie are nice. Oh yeah, and the Transformers themselves get some spotlight too. The student-mentor relationship between Optimus and Sentinel is a great dynamic, Bumblebee is a lot of fun as always, and Megatron and Starscream are fun as well like they were in the last movie. Not only that, but this movie also introduces the idea of a rich jerk helping out the Decepticons for salvation, and that's a pretty cool concept. Yeah, I like the characters in Dark of the Moon, and I think they're fun and interesting to watch. Oh, and I guess I can go ahead and talk about the effects. Top of the line. Seriously, this movie has amazing effects and destruction. I mean, come on, $98 million. How can you possibly mess up with $98 million? Never mind. And since I've already talked about the action, I can go ahead and mention the memorable soundtrack. The main theme of this movie has always been engraved in my head for many years. Now, before I give my rating for this movie, let me get a little personal for a second. If you watched the top 5 Transformers movie list I made in 2018, you would have heard me say all of these movies suck. But from 2016 all the way to 2018, my opinions just could not be trusted. Why? Because most of the time, my opinions were always largely influenced by what online internet critics had to say. But now that I think independently, I can fully embrace my love for these movies. I love the Michael Bay Transformers trilogy. While it has its problems and it's understandable people who grew up with G1 would harbor poor feelings for these movies, what you have to understand is people my age grew up with this version of Transformers. All the games I put hours into, all the toys I would beg my parents for, everything Transformers to me spawned from these movies. And they left a monumental positive impact on my life. I love these movies. They may be garbage to some people's eyes, okay, most people's, but I have always enjoyed them and I will continue to do so. While 4, 5, and Bumblebee exist, this original trilogy is all I really need. I'll be covering the sequels, but this trilogy is Transformers. And I want to thank Michael Bay and all the talent that went into these movies, since they are and always will be so special to me. Does Transformers Dark of the Moon deserve a 5 out of 5? Of course not. At the end of the day, it's a silly, high-budget action blockbuster. But my score since 2019 reflects how I feel about something. It reflects what it means to me, not its objective quality. And with that being said, I'm giving Transformers Dark of the Moon a 5 out of 5. One of my favorite movies of all time. Thank you guys for watching.